Hello, everyone. It's Scott, and we're back with day 4 of Aetherdrift preview season. And we got a lot of interesting cards to talk about today. But before we dive in, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this during Aetherdrift spoiler season and beyond. So let's look at today's previews. So first, we've got Mu Yanling Wind Rider for 2 and 2 blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a human wizard pilot and is a 2/4. So Mu is a desparked planeswalker, and when this creature enters the battlefield, create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1. Vehicles you control have flying, and whenever one or more creatures you control with flying deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Now, I think on its surface, it's a decent card here, but the problem with it is we've already got Enduring Curiosity from Duskmourn that does the same thing for the same cost. Now, you do get the advantage of creating the vehicle here, so if you care about that, this might be a better card, but with Enduring Curiosity, you're going to get more cards in the long run if you are looking to get card draw from one of your creatures. So I think probably not going to see a lot of standard play. Next, we've got Demonic Junker for 6 and a black mana. You get an artifact vehicle. That's a 4/3 with Affinity for artifact. And this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. And when this vehicle enters the battlefield, for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. If a creature you control was destroyed this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this vehicle. So Demonic Junker, very, very good card. Now, if you haven't seen Affinity before, this is one of the more powerful abilities on cards that we see, because in essence, if you're playing this in an Artifacts Matter deck, what will happen is probably by the time you actually cast this, you can get it down to 1 or 2 mana cost. Think about the blue creatures that are in standard right now that matter and care about how many instants or sorceries you have in your graveyard, and they reduce the cost of those spells. This is exactly the same thing, but it's for artifacts. So I expect this to be one of the most used vehicles from Aetherdrift. So expect to see it out there. And that ability to destroy a creature is very, very powerful. And even that ability, if you destroy one of your own, hey, you get 2 +1/+1 counters. You're probably even going to do that because this crews for so little that you play something and on the next turn you crew it, and now you're attacking with a 6/5. So very, very good card from the set. Next, we've got Perilous Snare for 2 and a white mana. You get an artifact with Start Your Engine. And when this artifact enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield. And if you reach max speed, you can tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control, but you can only activate that as a sorcery. So this is an okay removal spell in white. The thing that may matter with this one is it is an artifact. So if we do have a deck that is going to use white as part of their artifact build, then I can see this possibly seeing play in there because it's decent artifact removal. It's basically a banishing light effect that isn't actually being seen at all in standard, even though it's currently usable. And the simple reason is there's 1 and 2 cost white removal that's just simply better than this. So maybe down the road this may see more play, but I think only in an Artifacts Matters deck is where you're going to find this. Next, we've got Explosive Getaway for 3, a red and a white mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And it has Explosive Gateway, deals 4 damage to each creature. So this is a pseudo board wipe because you're going to be able to deal 4 damage to all the creatures that are left in play. So you're probably taking your best creature off the board and then leaving everything else there, and hopefully you kill everything. But for 4 costs, we've got a lot of 5 toughness creatures, so I don't think this is good enough right now to see standard play. Next, we've got District Mascot. For a green mana, you get a creature that's a dog mount, and it's a 0/0, and this creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. And you can pay 1 and a green to remove 2 +1/+1 counters from this creature and destroy target artifact. So I think a very good ability on this card. And whenever this creature attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and the saddle cost is 1. So this is a card that will grow over the course of a game if you saddle it. And even if you only saddle it once and then you use it to destroy an artifact, I think that's probably good enough to see standard play in the right kind of deck. So if we do end up with a mounts deck, then I think this is a card that would definitely see play in that. And if you're able to really, really grow this, or you've got a deck that's going to be able to give it additional +1/+1 counters, then I think it's going to be a very, very powerful card in standard. Next, we've got our lower rarity cards from the day. And we didn't actually, again, we only saw a few rares and mythics for the day, but we did get a lot of good uncommons for the day, so let's run through those. So the first is Glory. He links for 1 and a white mana. You get a cat mount. That's a 2/3 with lifelink. And whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a basic plane card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and its saddle cost is 2. So if you're in a deck where you really want to thin out your deck, I think this is a fine card to play, and it does have lifelink, so even if it's attacking on its own, it's a 2/3 for 3, so not a bad rate. So I think it's got some standard playability at this point. Next, we've got Nesting Bot. For a white mana, you get an artifact creature that's a robot with Start Your Engine. And when this creature dies, you get to create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. And if you reach max speed, this creature gets +1/+0, and it's a 1/1. So, if we do have an artifacts matter deck and we're looking for a 1-drop that's an artifact, and you want a creature to crew a vehicle or something, maybe this sees kind of play in that deck. Outside of it, I don't think it'll see any standard play. Next, we've got Tune Up. For 3 and a white mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's a vehicle, it becomes an artifact creature. So I think the only place we could even expect to see this is in an artifacts matter deck, and you would have to have a way of dumping things in the graveyard for this to be the most effective. And then you're going to be trying to dump artifacts that cost 7, 8, 9 mana into the graveyard to get the real benefit of this, because if you're using this and you're only getting a 3 mana artifact back, it just really isn't going to feel very good. So I think most likely this isn't going to see much standard play at all. Next, we've got Stock Up. For 2 and a blue mana. You get a sorcery, and you look at the top 5 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. I think this is actually a good card. Because that looking at 5 cards to draw 2, okay, that is very good. And because of that, I think blue decks will look to this because it helps them dig for the answers that they're going to need to play the game. And cards like this, like Memory Deluge is a good example of this, that was very popular over the last several years, saw a ton of play in standard. So I think Stock Up, which is a mana less, and you get to go deeper into your deck with it, I think it definitely has standard playability. Next, we've got Roadside Blowout. For 2 and a blue mana. You get a sorcery, and this spell costs 2 less to cast if it targets a permanent with mana value 1. Return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand, and you get to draw a card. So, this is, I think, a spell that definitely has some standard playability in it. We're seeing a lot of cards like this currently in standard that are seeing play. and they have some kind of additional ability on them that makes them more playable. In this case, you get to draw the card. So this is another one of those cards, that an unsummon effect, that has some standard playability. Next, let's dive into the black cards for the day. And first is Carrion Cruiser for 2 and a black mana. You get an artifact vehicle. That's a 3/2. And when this vehicle enters, mill 2 cards. Then return a creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand, and the crew cost is 1. So I think this is a good card if you're trying to get cards into your graveyard and any graveyard matter synergy. I think this is a fine card in that one, because it's going to get a vehicle back, it's going to get a creature back to your hand from your graveyard. So it doesn't even have to be something that it actually mills, it could be anything else that's already in there. And I think that makes it, probably again in an artifact matters deck, I think it's going to make it playable under those circumstances. Wicker Folk Indomitable for 3 and a black mana. You get an artifact creature. That's a scarecrow and is a 4/3. And you may cast this card from your graveyard by paying 2 life and sacrificing an artifact or creature in addition to paying its other cost. So I overall pretty vanilla. Gets a 4/3 for 4, but it also fulfills that artifact need, and the fact that you can sacrifice another artifact or a creature and get it back from your graveyard. I think that might be just enough for it to see some standard playability. Next, we've got Pace Setter Paragon for 2 and a red mana. You get a human pilot. That's a 2/3, and it has exhaust of 2 and a red mana, and you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It gains double strike until end of turn. So, probably a good card in limited. Given where standard is right now in red, it won't see play, but there might be a deck that does kind of want this kind of ability on it. And under those circumstances, I think there's an outside chance that it could see play in an exhaust deck, because getting double strike is actually, a pretty nice ability in standard. Next, we've got Back on Track for 4 and a black mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this token saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles as though its base power were 2 greater. So again, this is a 5 mana reanimator spell, and we've got better reanimator spells right now in standard for 4 mana. So I doubt we see play under normal circumstances with this, but I think if you are in a deck where getting that pilot token might be worth it, then maybe this sees some standard play. It certainly is going to be a good card in limited. Next, Embalmed Ascendant for 1, a white, and a black mana. You get a creature that's a zombie and is a 1/2. It has Start Your Engine, and when this creature enters the battlefield, you get to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and when you reach max speed, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So if we do have an aristocrat style deck in standard, then I think this is a fine card to include in that. You're getting 2 bodies for 3 mana, and if you get the Start Your Engine ability, you get the added bonus of every time a creature you control dies, your opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So I think that's good enough in an aristocrat style deck to see some standard play. Next, we've got Haunt the Network for 3, a blue, and a black mana. You get to choose target opponent, create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. Then the chosen player loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So the only place I think this will see any standard play, or even limited play for that matter, is in a deck that is focused on artifacts. Because under those circumstances, you stand to gain a decent amount of life, and your opponent will get drained a decent amount of life. And 5 mana, in essence, for 2 creatures, and then at a minimum, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life, just isn't standard playable. So I think it's got to be in a dedicated deck that is going to have a lot of artifacts in it. Next, we've got some commons for the day, and we'll run through those quickly. So the first is Bright Field Glider for a white mana. You get a Possum Mount. That's a 1/1 with Vigilance. And whenever this creature attacks while saddled, it gets +1/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. And the saddle cost is 3. I don't think it's playable. The saddle cost just makes it just too expensive for this kind of card. Next, we've got Beast Rider Vanguard for 1 and a green mana. You get a Human Knight. It's a 2/2, and for 4 and a green mana, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So I think this is a good limited card, but outside of that, I don't see it seeing standard play. Next, we've got Interface Ace for 1 and a white mana. You get an artifact creature that's a robot pilot and is a 0/4. And this creature saddles mounts and crews vehicles using its toughness rather than its power. Whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it. This ability triggers only once each turn. So interesting common. I think in limited it'll be a very good card in a deck where you're playing vehicles and mounts. But outside of that, I'm not sure that it has any standard playability. Now, the fact that you get to crew something with it and then get to untap it so it could be a blocker, I think is a nice thing on the card. So maybe it has some fringe standard playability because of that. But outside of that, I don't think it's going to see very much play at all. Next, we've got End Rider Catalyzer for 1 and a red mana. You get a Human Warrior. That's a 3/1 with Start Your Engine. And when you reach max speed, he can tap for 2 mana. So I think in limited, a very nice card to have. If you can reach max speed, then this becomes a large mana dork where you get to tap it for those 2 red mana, which could be relevant. But outside of that, I just don't see it seeing standard play. Next, we've got Veloheart Bike for 2 and a green mana. You get an artifact vehicle. That's a 4/2. And when this vehicle enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. And you can tap to add 1 mana of any color, and it crews for 2. So you get a vehicle that's kind of a mana rock in itself. And obviously you can crew it when you would want to do that. And the gaining 2 life's okay. But again, outside of decks that really kind of want that ability, where again it's probably going to be in an artifact deck where you care about this, I just don't see it as seeing standard play. Next, we've got Bestow Greatness for 2 and a green mana. Target creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample until end of turn. Limited playable at best. Next, we've got Clamorous Ironclad for 3 and a red mana. You get an artifact vehicle. That's a 6/3 with Menace, and its crew cost is 3, and you can also cycle it for 1 mana. Limited playable, probably not going to see any standard play. Next, we've got Gilded Goda for 1 and a red mana. You get a horse mount. That's a 2/2. And whenever this creature attacks while saddled, you create a treasure token, and its saddle cost is 1. I think this has some fringe standard playability if you're playing a deck where creating those treasure tokens is valuable. Outside of that, it's just a limited card. All right, those are our previews for day 4 of Aetherdrift spoiler season. I've left a link to my Aetherdrift preview videos here, and I'll be back potentially over the weekend with one more video for cards that are released on Saturday and Sunday, and we'll be back Monday with more Aetherdrift spoilers. So thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one.